Whose house? Hell's house! Welcome to Rotted, review of the day, and today we're going to be taking a spoiler-free look at the 1973 classic The Legend of Hell House. As always, this is a spoiler-free review. We're going to be having a spoiler-filled deep dive discussion video accompanying this one, but if you haven't seen the movie yet, you're wondering whether or not you should, this review is safe. This, for me, was one of my absolute favorites when I was growing up. It scared the pants off of me. And I always thought of it as not a sequel or a remake, but more of a spiritual successor to the 1963 The Haunting. It had some very similar elements to it, based on totally different books. So it had its own unique source, and it has its own unique characters and its own unique plot. But ultimately, it comes down to a team of investigators are in a haunted house and trying to prove or disprove life after death. But it takes its own turns, and it takes its own path, and the similarities are there, but it's very much its own unique movie. So yeah, like I said, this was absolutely one of my favorites, and I still hold true that I really do love this movie, and I really do think it's one of the scarier haunted house movies that history has provided us. But does that mean that it will hold up in a scoring system? Let's find out. As always, 5 different categories, each category worth up to 20 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the first category, as always, is plot. The plot of this one is remarkably, deceptively simple. There's a lot of movies that will spend a lot of time in the build-up to believably get characters setting foot in the house. That's the way a lot of haunted house movies work. And this one really doesn't go down that path, but it's not lazy. It's just purposefully simple. The characters are a professor and his wife, and 2 psychics, that one of whom is a veteran psychic that had spent time at the Belasco house / Hell House before. He was part of an investigative team prior and was the only one to make it out alive or sane. And even his sanity is a little bit in question because it's played by rowdy Roddy McDowall, who just really makes the movie. And he doesn't really hold back his McDowellness. But the premise is the professor meets with presumably a rich man, and the rich man says, go to Hell House, spend a week there, take a team, and prove life after death or disprove it. That's it, and it's off and running. I thought the premise and the setup was very good in that, and then what winds up happening is obviously the house doesn't like them there. It slowly builds up tension, it tricks them, it confuses them, it tortures them in its own unique fashion, and plays one against the other. It is a very classic spirits within a haunted house kind of movie, and ultimately it does wind up having its own core mystery element that gets investigated, and I don't want to really go into too much more because then we're going to be getting into spoiler categories, so I will be discussing that more in the deep dive discussion. Overall, I gave the plot a 14 out of 20. It was simple on its face, it was deep underneath, and I really did appreciate that. There were elements of the infighting between characters that I thought could have been done a little better, could have been done a little different, and there was a few moments in there that didn't really click for me. The ending especially, I thought, was good in terms of wrapping up the mystery, but not quite so good in terms of scares or believability, if that makes any sense whatsoever. The intent of this one was, it was made by 20th Century Fox. The intent was to get money. But beyond that, it was to take the source material of this book, adapt it into a film, and the source material of the book was a classic haunted house movie with very highly sexualized, erotic underlying themes to it. And I thought the movie pulled that off fairly well. It was never truly, obscene. It wasn't Caligula or anything. but it did bring those elements to the table, and it didn't really hold them back too awful much, especially for a fairly mainstream movie. So the scares I thought were present, the characters I thought were good, the setting was fantastically well done, and overall I had to give The Intent 16 out of 20 for this. Pretty stupendous. The acting, this I gave it 16 out of 20 for this, and here's the thing about it is if Roddy McDowall hadn't been in it, if he hadn't delivered the performance that he did, I probably would have graded it somewhere around the 12 or 13 mark, but he really elevated this. The main professor character, Clive Revel, he was good for the character he was trying to provide, but I think that his bullheadedness and abrasiveness was just a little bit too hammy and just a little bit less believable than the rest. Arguably, the main character is the younger female psychic that they brought on board, played by Pamela Franklin, and she did very good. But again, there was just some moments where when it needed to hit an 11, the voice cracked, kind of thing. That's the best I can really put it, is when the acting really needed to be hammered home, it just seemed a little forced, a little hammy, and a little less believable. Roddy McDowall is at his roddiest, and I loved it. So 16 out of 20 overall for acting. Pretty stellar performances. Technical, the effects were very good in this, but it was 1973, so there's only so much they could really do at the time. I gave it a 13 out of 20. There was a lot of stuff that really didn't quite hold up, but I think the 13 out of 20, the reason it got as much as it did was mostly because of the set design and the setting, which was just amazing. There were elements of this that the technical aspects of the filming and the camera angles and how they chose to film some things, it was perhaps purposefully disorienting, but it still didn't quite click with me on a really great level. So there was some give and take there. Ultimately, I had to give it above average, but it was one of the aspects of it that thrilled me the least. Regardless, there was nothing about the technical aspects of this film that pulled me out of it. It still held a good punch to it, and I was still glued to the screen. So take that for what you will. And the Fear Quotient, this is a tough one for me because I had seen this when I was a teenager, and it terrified me. I had trouble finishing it, and I gave it a 14 out of 20. This is a tough one just because how scared I was then. It's obviously not how scared I am now. First of all, I have a much better tolerance for horror movies. Second of all, and probably more important, I know everything that's going to happen in the movie. I know every element of it and where the scares are going to be happening and so on. So it's a difficult one for me to judge in today's context, giving it a score right here and now. What I will say is that it played the fears masterfully. It really held long moments of suspense. It knew when to break that suspense and with what element, whether it be a scare or be a cool down. And I thought the timing of those kind of things worked really well. And the ultimate conclusion, like I said earlier, the reason it probably didn't get higher than a 14 is because the ultimate conclusion of it, although wrapping up a good mystery, did not wrap up with any kind of fear element to it. It just kind of, well, that answers that, and moving on. So overall total score of 73, which is apt. It came out in 73. 73 out of 100 points. And I just want to wrap this up by saying, if you love classic movies, and especially if you love haunted house movies, I really can't recommend this enough. If you are in the mood for a monster or bloodfest scare, that kind of slasher film, if that's your cup of tea, then maybe this one is best to avoid. This is very mental. This is very, it gets in your head, and it plays with your head, and it plays with the characters' heads. There's not a lot of overt violence and gore. but it is, I really can't recommend it enough if you do love haunted house movies. This is a must watch. So, as always, I will be providing a justwatch.com link down below in the description. At any point, if it becomes available to stream, rent, or buy, you should be able to find out from there. And we'll be discussing the movie further in the deep dive discussion. And that's about it. So next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.